So tonight we're going to focus on 1948 to the present. And that's going to be really fast. And then we're going to really focus on the present. But 1948, if you're familiar with your history, was the founding of modern Israel by the United Nations. And it created, intentfully at that time, in its own weird way, a divided land. On the map that you see over here on the screen, right-hand side, you've got a little bit of description. So the United Nations plan in 1948, Israel is all the orange pieces. The Arab state, they didn't name what it was, but they said there's an Arab state, would be all of the yellow pieces in the map. Jerusalem, nobody got. That was white, and it was the United Nations administration. But they didn't have any plan when they did this. They really didn't have any plan for how they would handle Jews and Palestinians in each other's territories. They just kind of said, this is yours, and this is theirs, and that's really all they did. And how, you might say, how is that going to work? It didn't work very well. And part of that is if you can just think about, these things are not well connected. So it's almost like what we get with gerrymandering maps around here. You know, these things that are all disconnected in little bitty spots. And how would you have a country that has a weird borders like this with something else next to it? 1947, the population in the Israel-Palestine area was about 630,000 Jews, about 143,000 Christians, and about 1,200,000 Muslims. So that's a religious distribution. 1948, what ended up happening with that? What you ended up seeing was roughly 500 to 800,000 Palestinians either fled the area that became Israel or were literally expelled. Israel came in, the forces of Israel came in, and literally emptied out roughly 500 or more villages, gave the homes to Jews, simply shut them down and pushed them out. At the same time, about 50,000 Jews fled or were expelled from areas that became the Arab state. They just kind of pushed each other's people out and said, can't be here. On a moment's notice, in some cases a day or two, have to leave. You might imagine all this happens, so we end up with wars in 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, if you were old enough to remember some of those. Some of those were like the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War. Specifically, in 1967 and 1973, two or three big things happened with those. They didn't just fight, but Israel then took over the Golan Heights in the north, connecting Syria. They took over the West Bank, which is from the Jordan River over into Jerusalem area and such as that. That's known as the West Bank. And they took over Jerusalem itself. Now that did give them a buffer for security because they kept getting attacked. And they didn't want to get attacked anymore. It was too small of a country, so they said, here's their buffer for security. It did also give some folks who said, here's this historical land of Israel, sometimes what are known as Zionists. Those are the ones that say, we're going to go back to where it was and how it was in the time of Zion, the time of David. So they saw that as recovering and reclaiming some of the lands that were supposed to be theirs anyways. But they also then ended up controlling Jerusalem, which has some side effects and the complications of occupation. They had all these Palestinians, which were all sorts of different kinds of folks, but all these Palestinians that were in this occupied land. What do you do with that? Well, as the time went by, there was lots more fights and arguments, and in 1995 we have the Oslo Accords. And this is a great big agreement, worked on for years, the idea that Israel has a right to exist. And part of the Palestinians said, yes, Israel has a right to exist. And Israel said the Palestinians would have a right to self-administration. They wouldn't be just told what to do. They'd have their own sort of government. There would be no new settlements. Israel agreed no new settlements would be built from there on out. And in the future, unstated when and how, in the future they'd work out this whole issue of how the Palestinians would be able to return and how Israel would withdraw. But they didn't really answer those questions, and not everybody agreed, so we have an incomplete mess. Some people agreed, some people did not, some people endorsed it, some people did not. You had nobody believe the other side. They all thought each other was lying just to get an agreement. And you have promises that were broken. by everybody. You had militant Arabs, you hear about that, Hamas and Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and you have expansionist Zionists simply saying, we want the whole country, and we will eventually get it. So you have demonstrations, rebellions, you have oppression, you have terrorism, you have walls, you have anger, because this is such a mess. Today, some quick thoughts. One thing is to make clear, Palestinian is a name for a group of people who live in a place, or at least used to live in a place, until they got pushed out. Kind of like we call ourselves Americans. When we say American, we're not saying that we're a particular religion or even a particular race. Palestinian is people from a place. At the moment, they can be Muslim, about 50,000 Christians still over there, Baha'i faith. There's Samaritans, which is a variation of the Jewish tradition. The Druze that we talked about previously, you have secular folks who don't believe in anything. Those are all Palestinians. They're residents of Israel-occupied lands, but they're not citizens of a country, which has some weird side effects. There are 4 million, more than 4 million, that have legal limbo. They don't really belong anywhere legally in that way. That doesn't include the ones that might be in Lebanon and Jordan, places like that. Most of them, at least in our experience, I think most folks, if you really look at it, would say most of them, they simply want to provide for a family, they want to raise their kids, they want to go to work, they want to go to school, they want to get along with folks. That's what their preference is. But we do know, and there is also militant Palestinians and Arabs. I mentioned some of those before. Those are the ones that fire the rockets and come over and try to do the terrorist attacks, and they're convinced that, yes, indeed, they want to crush Israel and push them into the sea and claim their country back. But an interesting thing when they do polling. Same thing we might have here. Are we always happy with our government and who we think is in charge or who claims to be in charge? Most of the polling would say that most of the Palestinians they don't like and don't approve of Hamas and those. They think they're corrupt, they think that they're violent, they think they're counterproductive, but they have no power to change who's in charge. So to wrap up a little piece of mine, I'd like to introduce you to a real person, not just a name of a group of people. So this is Khalil Shrine. He was our guide. He was born in the old city of Jerusalem. He has served and continues to serve as a college instructor. He is a licensed guide. There's a whole process to what that was interesting to learn what he had to go through to get licensed as a guide. He is fluent in at least 4 languages, maybe more. And he is a resident of the Palestinian territory. He has a Jordanian passport that allows him to travel with restrictions on how he can get there and get in and out stuff, but he has a Jordanian passport. But he's not a citizen of Jordan. He's not a citizen of any country, which raises really weird things when he travels and tries to answer questions. He is subject to travel and other restrictions because he lives in the occupied area of Israel. And you might have seen, if you saw some of our stuff on Facebook or a little conversation, we had, when we were going through Jerusalem, at one point he kind of said, well, would you like to look at something that's off, not on the normal tourist maps? I said, sure. So he said, well, why don't we come this way? We wandered through part of the old city, and he says, this door over here is, what he says, I think this is the most important door in all of Jerusalem, but you won't find it in any tourist map. And that's where he showed us this is where he was born. Khalil grew up in the old city of Jerusalem. He grew up in the family home that his great-great-great, coming back I don't know how many, purchased in 1525. This has been the family home for 500 years. They still have original documents that show the purchase. They've been passing it down. There's a whole thing that's really neat about how they have a sort of a family corporation. There's 800 some family members. They all own equal shares. Nobody can sell it without having the agreement for everybody else. They have a lottery every 3 years to figure out who gets to live in the family house. Really kind of interesting. And, you know, so they bought 1525. They've added a second floor in 1600, a third floor in 1915. Think of it that way. 500 years of family history, unbroken. And yet, Israel says he's not a citizen. The government of Israel says he's not a citizen. He has limited rights. Many people in Israel say, this is our land, you should not be here. How does that work? Who has the claim? Based upon what? Wherever our sympathies may lie, this is the core to some of the important and difficult questions that are going on and why we see some of the conflict that we have over there. So I will pause now and invite Jason to come up and share with you some of the other pieces that kind of put a big picture around this.
And no worries tonight, no surprise donkey rides. So as we started thinking about how we were going to talk about this divided nation and what it really meant to the people of the nation, we were trying to kind of pare things down. Because I think Pastor and I both could probably stand up here and we could talk about 2 hours or more just on this topic and what it actually means and why it's important to us as a people. Because I think one of the things that we hear over and over again is basically a narrative that certain groups want us to hear. Whether it be our own government or the Israeli government or the world in general, everybody has their own opinion and their own narrative about how this should work. But we're going to put it in real people terms. And where we're headed with this is a place called August Victoria. August Victoria was built by German Chancellor William II in about 1907 and dedicated to his wife, which is why the name is what it is. It became the military headquarters in World War II of the Ottomans, where the Armenian genocide plan was brought into existence. And this is where they directed that plan. And in the 1940s, it came under the control of the Lutheran World Federation. Now, this group is a nonprofit group that really seeks to improve the lives of the people that it serves. In the 1980s, it was renovated. It treats approximately 700 people per day for oncologic diseases or cancer and kidney diseases. And a lot of the oncologic treatments are for children. And it also is home to a lot of diabetes care management for the Palestinian population. Now, it has 171 beds. How many people can tell me how many beds Rowan Regional has? Best guess. 230. Now think of the 200 to 250,000 people that Rowan Regional has to serve. With fewer beds, this hospital has to serve a population of 5 million. In even bigger terms, radiotherapy, which is radiation treatments for cancer, they have these things called cyclotrons, which is what they build when we're doing radiotherapy. And the WHO recommends having 10 for that size of a population. August Victoria has 3. So you can imagine some of the challenges that this place faces in trying to treat a population of 5 million. Some of the other issues that are surrounding this is that those from Gaza are required by Israeli law to have a health permit to travel from Gaza to Jerusalem, which on a good day is going to take about an hour and a half to 2 hours to drive from Gaza to Jerusalem to get to August Victoria. Now, remind you that this is the only place that will serve as a place for treatment of cancers. For families who have children who are undergoing treatment for childhood cancer, this presents a major challenge. Most of these adults are 20 to 40 years of age and are considered high security risks simply because of where they're from in Gaza. They cannot obtain a health permit to travel with their children. So many of these families are putting their children into cars with grandparents, aunts and uncles, or close neighbors who are older who can obtain a health permit to travel to Jerusalem, where they may stay between 3 and 6 months to receive treatment. This broke my heart, in all honesty, as a physician. It broke my heart as a parent, thinking that if my children had to undergo treatment and I had to send them with my father, and I could not see my child through the course of therapy that honestly could end their life, and I could not be there with them, all because I just did not fit the right profile, personally. For those that do obtain health permits to be able to travel, there is this constant, ever-changing network of checkpoints that they must pass through between Gaza and Jerusalem. And for no rhyme or reason, these checkpoints may be closed, which means they have to reroute to go through a different checkpoint. A lot of them are held unnecessarily or delayed to the point that they show up 2 to 4 hours late for their treatment. This is a nightmare for the people of the Gaza area. It's a nightmare for those in Jerusalem because simply there's not enough care to go around for all those that need it. So those are a couple of major issues. The other big issue is the level of corruption within their own self-governance of the Palestinian Authority. Millions, almost billions of dollars have been spent in aid to the Palestinian Authority that never ends up getting to the people. In fact, this one facility has an accounts receivable. They are owed $30 million from their own government. That simply they have submitted the payments or submitted the charges and simply are not getting paid. Which, as you can imagine, for a healthcare organization that is doing this as a nonprofit, that can be financially devastating for what they are trying to accomplish. $30 million that are being withheld. This is a picture of the outside of August Victoria. Inside is a chapel as part of the grounds, and it is absolutely breathtaking. It is a beautiful, beautiful area of worship. Pictures simply do not do it justice. And one of the things that I got into, if you ever want to see pictures, I got into taking a lot of pictures of the domes of these cathedrals because they are absolutely amazing. And at times, they even laughed at me because I would lay on the floor to get the right angle for the picture. But I did not do this here. It was a little chilly. So the other thing that we get to talk about is the separation wall. And the separation wall is approximately 30 feet high, concrete wall, fully concrete, and on top has several layers of razor wire, and all along the wall, they have guard towers where snipers are posted. And this is the separation wall that everyone talks about, how great it has been for Israel, because it has cut down on the number of suicide bombings and the number of illegal residents, but it's to what cost? And so the Palestinians, part of the rebellion that has occurred is because they are a people trapped, not only by economic situation, but they are a people trapped by geography. A lot of these areas now in the occupied West Bank and in the areas around Bethlehem and Jerusalem, you have these pockets now of Palestinian areas that go by zones. And we're not going to bore you with all the details of the zones, but just know that in Zone A, if you come up on the Zone A, you come up on this big red sign that says, "Do not enter on possibility of losing your life if you're an Israeli citizen." That's their warning to the Israelis. Zone A is all run by the Palestinian Authority. It's all under the control of the Palestinian Authority. So one of the ways that the people rebel, and I don't know how many of you like graffiti artists, but some of these people are extremely talented. And I just wanted to give you some pictures of what we saw on the outside of the wall. This is the face of a young lady who is used, and we'll see her picture again here in a moment, as a symbol of what it means to succeed as a Palestinian. There's a machine here in the middle. Here we see a little bit of a Palestinian being snarky. On the right is an Israeli soldier, and on the left is a donkey being asked for his papers, not being able to move through the country. And this is what they experience every single day. They feel like it is so ridiculous that they would even ask a donkey for their papers. All along the wall, you see the symbol of a key. Now, I did not write this down. Pastor may help me remember the symbolism of the key. But it was in a lot of locations along the wall. And I tried to look it up online. I couldn't find anything on that. And I could not remember what Khalil had told us about the key.
Any details other than the unlocking?
And a lot of people, like when they were forced from their homes, they expected to be returned.
So they still had their
key to their house.
Yeah.
Keys to their house.
Yeah, so a lot of these areas, they're right. That is right. That's what Khalil had said. They still had their keys in hand of their own homes.
His grandfather had just sold a whole bunch of stuff on crops, had the money in the house, was told they had to leave, took his keys, left some of the stuff in the house, figured we're going to be back in a couple of days. It's been 70 years. And somebody else moved into his house and got all of the furniture, got whatever money they had, got all the savings, and somebody else lives there. Different, not the ancient old story, but the different house that's in there.
And on the right, y'all see who that is, right? So this is symbolism that is all along the wall. Trump's love for walls, but also Trump's love for Netanyahu, which is just one of those things that Palestinians cannot grasp as to why anybody would want to subject another people to what they're living through.
And that's actually a dark tower in the corner.
And there was a reference in that one to Banksy, who is one of the most world-renowned graffiti artists and responsible for some of the artistry that we see here, and owns the only hotel without a view. The hotel front is right up next to this wall. But it's one of the most expensive hotels to stay in because of who owns it. And they have an art gallery and show a lot of his work there. This is the young lady I spoke of earlier, who is a symbol of how to succeed and a way to rebel. There were a number of people that were pictured along the wall, and I did not put any of those pictures up here, that had lost their lives because of the conflict between Israel and Palestine. The last one, and I'll kind of read it. It says, "Destiny failed us through this hole, failed us through this hole called the West Bank. Just like Alice in the rabbit hole, we are trapped in dark prison and separation walls." But the artistry just caught my eye when I was taking pictures, and I thought it was absolutely beautiful. In another city that we visited, Hebron, which is another Palestinian city, we saw direct evidence of what this separation is really causing, not only on an economic level, but on a personal level for a lot of these folks. And in Hebron, this is a picture of the marketplace. Now, what do you notice about the marketplace?
Only one person I see selling stuff, not like the others.
Yeah, so there's not there are some shops that are open, but as you look down through there, really the only people on the street is our group. That's it. This was one of the largest and most active markets before the separation wall. Now, all these people who have these shops, that have owned these shops for hundreds of years, are eking out a living by the few tourists that come along. And I don't know if you can see it, but on the left-hand side, can you see the fence along the top of the buildings? This is one. This is part of where the separation wall is being expanded to currently. And as part of it, a lot of these places that you see above the shops are personal homes of the people. Over here on the left, we're walking down one of the corridors. And as we got out to the other end of the corridor, there was another archway off to our right. And the only thing you could see through the archway, which actually led into other parts of another market, are big concrete blocks, blocking off the throughways that are into the old part of the city of Hebron. On the other side is all Israeli. Here is another picture to kind of get a scale of how big of a city Hebron actually is. But one of the things that you see in this picture, and I'm pretty sure that's what it is, up on top, the larger white buildings at the top there, that is actually a garrison station for the Israeli army. And in this one area alone, there was an occupied area for approximately 1,000 people. There were 5,000 guards. That's the information that we were providing. 5,000 guards for 1,000 people.
Settlers.
Yeah. And here is just another view of that same area from a different angle. And you can get an idea, as you see razor wire along the tops of the homes here, those are kind of the dividing lines. And in between, there is a no man's land where nobody has anything. As we were walking through Hebron, one of the things that we did is we went through a checkpoint, a security checkpoint station, and the Palestinian guide that was with us from the city of Hebron wanted to show us what would happen if he tried to go further than he was supposed to. And so he didn't get beyond where he knew exactly where he could go to, but within 100 feet of getting to that area, out comes this very young Palestinian Defense Force guard, heavily armed, could not have been more than 20, a very young fellow. And he's telling him, you know, you cannot go there. And he looks back at the guard and says, well, you know, I can go to this spot. Did your children ever do that? I can go here. Well, do you mean there? And so he wanted to show us what it would mean to him as a person. And that's the only time I think any of us got a little nervous on any of the trip. And it wasn't nervous for our sakes, because as Americans we could go wherever we wanted to. But for his sake, we did not want him to just push the limits. And then here's another picture of the Israeli settlement, and as you can see in the background right there, you can tell how new some of those buildings are compared to some of the other structures that are surrounding that area. And these are Israeli settlers who are there to occupy that territory and then eventually expand the Israeli territories. One of the things we wanted to do tonight also was to make sure that we gave time enough, and I see that it's about 22, to answer questions that you guys might have, or to have a bit more conversation than just showing pictures and us up here talking about it tonight. So I'm going to open that up and see if anyone has any questions.
Justin, I have a question concerning this picture. I see that greenery on top of the roofs. Are those garden areas?
Those are not meant to be garden areas specifically. Some of those are actually unkept areas that have started growing grass. There are some homes that do have garden areas on them, but most of it is in pots or in planters. They're not in.
Just many of those are blocked off, nobody can get up there. They've
Yeah.
literally welded shut the doors, so nobody can go up.
What kind of trees are those in the background there?
There are some cedars, some cypress. There are several different types, and then there are date palms off to the right. You can see there. And you see date palms everywhere now.
So Jason, you were saying the guard was a Palestinian guard. In the pictures on Facebook, for some reason I was thinking it was an Israeli guard. And
No,
y'all
it was
were-
an Israeli guard. We had passed through the checkpoint from the Palestinian side of the checkpoint into the Israeli side, and it was an Israeli guard.
And that checkpoint's important from a different point of view. The checkpoint we went through is right next to the shrine mosque for the patriarchs. And back in the 1990s, an Israeli settler went into the mosque during prayers and shot and killed about 35 Muslim worshippers during prayers. That started a bit of a riot. The Israeli government came in and decided the best way to solve this was to create the barriers. They closed off all entrances to that area except one. It's an electronic gate. Every person going into that mosque, that whole area, has to go through one door. They gave 2/3 of the mosque to Israel, to the Jewish, to be part of what they would consider their shrine to the patriarchs. They left 1/3 of it for the Muslims, and they restricted Muslim access to the own shrine after an Israeli went in and murdered people.
And the original tombs are still in the Muslim side of the mosque. We were able to go in and view those. Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Rebecca.
How long is that wall?
Oh goodness. This is just in the city of Hebron. The Bethlehem wall is quite large. That was where I took all the pictures of the graffiti, was along the wall in Bethlehem. But I don't even know the entire size or length.
If you want to chat or answer, I can pull up an image that I do have. That might be helpful.
But I don't know the total amount of feet or miles that this wall occupies. In one of our earlier talks, we were talking about the city of Batir, which was the terraced gardens. And in the city of Batir, off to one end, you can see an Israeli settlement. And one of the plans was to extend the wall right through the city of Batir, which is very important why it is now a World Heritage Site, because it keeps that from occurring.
This may help. The West Bank walls, there's multiple of them as of 2010. This is just the East Jerusalem area. You can see all that red line, the squiggly red line, that is the current barrier route as of 2007. The pinkish areas are Israeli settlements. You can just see how they're all over the place. The yellow areas are Palestinian-built areas. So it's circling around all over the place. This is a different view of it, separation wall. This is more recent, but it can show you where it's also planning to go, literally to encircle the entire area of Palestinian occupied land. It would literally be encircled by a wall, all the way around. The only way to get in and out is through Israeli checkpoints. And they don't have their own airports or anything else. So that is the plan, so just path the wall.
And it depends on who you talk to as to how they view this. And we listened to several speakers. One was part of the Israeli government. His name is Bob Lang. Bob is actually a Wisconsin graduate, moved to Israel and became a citizen, but now helps to run one of the Israeli settlements. And their viewpoint is that they have the right to do this. From an Israel standpoint. From a Palestinian standpoint, the Palestinians see it as a way of controlling more and more land and pushing more and more of the Palestinian people out. So that instead of a single small areas of occupation, what you're going to see is you're going to see these converge over time, and then the wall will just be a mechanism by which they just encircle and enclose the whole thing.
I have an interesting quote. Just came out today. There's elections going on in Israel. One of the candidates in Israel, Moshe Feiglin, he's seeing a surge in the polls right now, member of one of the country's smaller parties, but he isn't vying for power. This was his statement that the country is seeing a rise in other far-right candidates. Moshe Feiglin wants to annex the occupied West Bank and Gaza, dispatch and expel the remaining hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, and annex those areas as official Israeli country territory. That is his official platform as a candidate for president, prime minister, whatever it is, for the
Prime Minister.
It's phenomenal. And there's so many other things that could go into what is happening in terms of pushing people. You don't have to necessarily take a gun to somebody, and if you make life miserable as possible, they want to leave at some point. You want them to leave. Kim's got a couple of things. Do you want to share what you brought on some of the issue of what we saw in the Bedouin village?
Like they were talking about the Palestinian areas getting really encircled by a lot of the Israeli areas, they limit the roads that the Palestinians can drive on. So many of them, you think you want to go to work, they have to take this big long way around because they're not allowed to travel through roads. Some of them are not allowed to go through the checkpoints. What a lot of them are trying to do to earn a living is a lot of the women are doing like handcrafts. So they're doing a lot of stitching on like table runners, placemats, clothing, and then they get them out into some of the stalls in Jerusalem to sell to try and make a living. As well as they're doing a lot of like felted animals, craft type of stuff. All of which, if anybody has done any handwork, they know the number of hours that it takes. It's really not a viable way to make a living. There's organizations that are trying to help them by actually bringing in like the supplies that they can't get and giving them a place to work so they can kind of try and turn out this stuff to make a living. But, you know, it's not real effective. I mean, it was very sad for me to see the conditions that a lot of Palestinian people live in. And it's not from their own desire, you know, not to work, not to do anything. It's just the situation that they're forced into.
The unemployment rate in the Palestinian occupied territory, in the Palestinian territories, is between 40 and 50%.
How do you have a job? An example of one is a business in that Bethlehem area that I'm familiar with, tries to have a business to export a little bit. But if you think about it, has no access to external ports, has no access to be able to send things. So the only way to do it is he has a small little factory, loads up a truck every morning. That truck has to go to one of the barriers. You cannot drive a vehicle through the barrier. They have to totally unload the entire truck. All of the contents has to be passed through the security folks. They have to check it, make sure that there's no issue with it. They have to hand carry it through a people gate. Then they have to put it on a separate truck on the other side to be able to take it anywhere it's going to go. What does that do to your business? What does it do to your business if all of a sudden that day, that gate is closed? These are the kinds of pressure. Simply getting an approval. If your home is not in good condition, you can get a demolition order because your home is not in good condition. So you have to get a building permit. So you apply for a building permit, and you know what? If you're Palestinian, that building permit just never quite seems to get granted. But if you don't fix your place up, it's subject to demolition.
And the other problem is, even if it's granted, it's paid for by the Palestinian Authority, which may have used that money to line the pockets of the politicians. So you're not able to do anything.
But there are, in the past week, there's rockets, there's attacks, there's people trying to tunnel in. There's fear. And it all feeds together. Any other questions real quick? We're just about time to be finishing up.
Besides the corrupt government, what kind of government, I mean, I'm not we're a democracy. What kind are they?
Nominally, they have, on the Palestinian side, they do have elections. You have two different major groups. You have Fatah on the West Bank, you have Hamas in Gaza. But they control those things much like you would have in any other corrupt environment. There are no other meaningful candidates. And if you are, particularly in the Hamas area, and they think that you are potentially doing any cooperation with Israelis, you are subject to summary execution. They take you in the middle of the night and you don't show up again because they think that you might be cooperating with Israel.
And Israel is considered a democratic system. Kind of more along the lines of what you see in England than how we would consider a democracy. They do have a prime minister
Yeah,
and
and many
elected
that.
parliament.
I guess they have taxes. How do they determine who pays taxes if you're a citizen or a resident or whatever? How do they collect the money?
I have no idea how taxes are handled over there.
And I don't either, but Carolyn, one of the ways that it's what I would call forced segregation. If we all think back to the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, think of Selma, think of Alabama and Mississippi, and the segregation even within North Carolina back at that time. How do they force segregation? In this country, the way they force segregation is if you're an Israeli citizen, you have a yellow license plate. With a yellow license plate, you can go anywhere you want to. If you are Palestinian, you get a white license plate with green lettering, which means you cannot travel on the Israeli-only roads, which is what Kim is speaking of, where you may have to travel another hour out of your way to go for a trip that might take 10 minutes otherwise, because you are not allowed to be on those roads.
And lots of other things, those funding of schools, funding of hospitals, everything else. The Israeli environment is wonderful, it's green, it's well-funded, it's high-tech, and the Palestinian side is not.
Even the garbage.
Even the garbage collection. Weird things, there's rules.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the people would try and gather up some of the garbage because the Palestinian area was getting dirty and gross, and they were getting in trouble for doing so and told that your government is supposed to do that. You cannot do that, the government needs to do that. Well, the Palestinian Authority doesn't spend any money to run garbage trucks, clean up, keep the areas nice. So it's really, I don't know, subtle, not so subtle ways to try and make it as merciful as possible for them, so people just eventually.
One example that might resonate with you as farmers here in Rowan County, this kind of connects to the Bedouin. So the Bedouin, as we shared last week, used to be herders
nomads wandering around. Now they've been told you can't do that anymore. And what they're really being pressured, they can't build any kind of permanent structures. Israel is trying really hard to push them to move into the cities of like Bethlehem and Hebron and stuff like this, move there. And in some cases, other places, they've said, there's housing, we've got a housing loan, go there. That's where the jobs are at. 50% unemployment, that's where the housing is at, you need to move. Now imagine as long as you live here with your farms. And if somebody came and said, we're taking your land, but you know what, we've got a really nice place for you in downtown Statesville. It's there, it's good, you got water, you got heat, don't worry about it, just go, just leave. Because we got a place for you, but you can't stay here. Would you? What do you have in the closet that you might be inclined to pull out? There you go. But this becomes the story, as Jason said. This becomes the story. What narratives do we hear from which sides? Who's at fault if there's a rebellion? Who's at fault if there's a demonstration? It's often more complicated. We need to be letting fire get going, but is there any last question that you might have? Well, thank you for joining us. Next week we will be having, Kim will be leading a lot of the Via Dolorosa. Kim's looking at me. Via Dolorosa and the Garden Tomb and some of those things from Jerusalem. Yeah, there's some more information up here. She's got some information about an Israeli group. Ex-Israeli IDF soldiers who are championing a different path than what they are doing now.
In there.